I'll stop drinking.
So, hi folks, thank you for joining us. We're here tonight celebrating Colleen Hubbard's novel, Housebreaking. Very quickly while I introduce you folks. We're joined also tonight by Daniel Handler. We're joined by all of you fine folks here in the bookstore and online. So you can give it up for yourselves. I'll allow it. So I usually have a lot of housekeeping and a lot of housebreaking and a lot of announcements before we get started for an event, but I'm going to be very brief this evening because I want to get to the meat of the matter, but I also want to let you know solely about Independent Bookstore Day, which is this coming Saturday, April 30th. It is our biggest day of the year. We're going to have raffles for free books. We're going to have libations, which are complimentary. While supplies last, we're going to have a bunch of different stuff. We're also going to have a live music show in the evening. So we really do hope that you drop by at any point during the day. There's a lot going on. We would love to see you there. So that's a wrap on Independent Bookstore Day. You can find more info on our website at greenapplebooks.com, where you can also see our whole calendar of events, which I'm a little biased, but they are all pretty great. So you can check that out on our website. I will say thank you for keeping your masks on in the event space, just because we're all sitting together and like the ventilation is particularly great in this very old building. We're just trying to be as safe as we can so we can continue to host events such as these. So thank you for being cool about it. Let's get to it, shall we? I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two folks that are joining us, and then we're going to have well, I don't want to spoil the program, so I'll let them get to it. First, Daniel Handler is the author of the novels All the Dirty Parts, We Are Pirates, The Basic Eight, Watch Your Mouth, and Why We Broke Up, among others. As Lemony Snicket, he is responsible for many books for children, including the 13-volume sequence, A Series of Unfortunate Events, and the 4-part series, All the Wrong Questions. He is married to the illustrator Lisa Brown, and lives with her and their son in San Francisco. Please welcome Daniel Handler.
Hello.
And last but most certainly not least, the woman of the hour, a native of New England, Colleen Hubbard now lives in the UK with her family. She wrote her debut novel, Housebreaking, while on maternity leave from her job with the NHS. She graduated from the University of East Anglia's MA program in creative writing, where she earned the head of school prize with a distinction. Her novel, Housebreaking, is the reason we are here tonight, so please welcome Colleen Hubbard.
Hooray, hooray! Hello, thank you for coming to the real room and to whatever room you're watching this in, you poor sad thing. Colleen and I are old pals. We met here in San Francisco at a Scottish bar and bonded immediately over a writer that neither of us liked. And we've become friends ever since. She was working on various fiction projects for a long time and never let me read any of them. And I couldn't be happier with Housebreaking. I'm so happy it's out in the world. I was so happy to at last get to read it when I was in galleys and know that she is an acute and sharp, in all senses of the word, observer of the human scene on the page, as she is when you sit next to her at a Scottish bar and get catty about other people. I imagine that many people are familiar to you in this audience. So
everyone,
it feels,
literally everyone.
Yeah, that's as it should be for a first novel when it's just out. Do you want to read first? Or you want to talk first? You want to talk first? Do you want to read?
So I can get it over with.
All right. She wants to read and get it over with. That's the spirit.
Here we go. This is at the beginning of the book, but not the first page.
I chose the part. She made me choose what part to read.
I forgot to bring a book. I forgot to bring a copy of my own book to read.
I'm more interested in the career of Colleen Hubbard than she is in the career of Colleen Hubbard.
When she was 7, Greg's parents had invited everybody out to their new boat. As Uncle Chuck lifted her in, she saw a metal trap with 4 doors that flopped open when the rope was let loose. Inside dangled a hunk of rotten chicken meat. They took the boat into the shallow water and dropped the trap. A few green lobsters scuttled in, and the boys fought to be the one to snap the doors closed. It wasn't lobster season, and anyway, the lobsters were too small to eat. Instead, Uncle Chuck let them bring one small lobster back to the parking lot, where Greg's older brother, Mitch, smashed it open with a rock. Mitch fitted a stick into the cracked open tail meat and pushed as the lobster writhed. She washed her hands in the diner's bathroom and took the streetcar to the neighborhood where she had lived with her father. She hadn't been there for years. She sat at a bus stop and watched the door for almost an hour until a young couple with a curly-haired dog walked out. Both the couple and the dog looked expensive. Their rent must have gone up. She walked to a nearby college bar where she wouldn't know anyone. Gin and tonics were 2 for $1. Can I get a slow gin fizz? She asked the bartender, who had a sprinkle of acne across his cheeks. They didn't have that. They didn't have any of the other cocktails she asked about either. Instead, she ordered 4 gin and tonics and took a seat on the couch covered with a brown velour throw. Frasier was playing on the TV. It was a hot and drowsy night, and though she had tied her hair up in a knot, some strands clung to the sweat on the back of her neck and made her feel feverish and strange. She drank the 4th cocktail, felt a wash of salt in the back of her throat, and rushed to the nearest bathroom. It was the men's room. Thankfully, it was empty. She puked into a urinal and wiped her mouth with her sleeve. A college boy in his school sweatshirt had taken a seat on the other end of her couch. As he leaned toward her, she caught the haze of cheap beer on his breath. Where are you from? He slurred in an accent that she couldn't place. Nowhere you'd know, she told him. She grabbed her bag, waved to the bartender, and started the long walk home.
Yeah, you can applaud it. That was an applause line. I think we can start right there. The heroine of this novel, can I call her a mess? She's kind of a mess. Yeah. And she's, I think, the kind of mess that we all know where we're utterly sympathetic to her every moment, but it still adds up to a mess and we would like to unravel it in some way. Tell me how she got on the page there, that mess.
So the book started because for a few weeks we didn't have a place to live. We had sold our house and we were moving to a new place. So we had to stay with a friend, and he had a book on his bookshelf that I just picked up and started to read. And this book was a biography of Shakespeare, and it said that Shakespeare and his company moved their entire theater over the ice one night. And I kept thinking about that idea of moving a building over ice, and I thought it was so compelling, and I liked the opportunity for metaphor there. And I wanted to do it with just a normal sized house and not a commercial building. But I had to think of who would do something so crazy as moving a building across ice. And I had to think that it was somebody who was probably not entirely mentally well and was really angry and was really motivated to do something that was stupid and impossible and strange and would probably get her killed.
Yeah. I think this is a beautiful book for anyone who's had a scheme that they knew was a bad idea, but still really, really wanted to do it. And she really does it.
Why is that not the blurb on the front cover? Because I think it should be.
You wouldn't let me blurb.
I didn't let you blurb.
True story. And I think, like all powerful metaphors, it feels like a metaphor for everything for me when I'm reading this book. Is it a metaphor for something specific in your mind? No. Okay, my guess has been Colleen Hubbard. Because anyway, I think there's many questions. It feels destructive, which is really interesting to me. I feel there are countless novels that are, we would like to build a house, we would like to repair a house. Where's the home? Oh, here it is. We have to make it better. This book is a little, who cares about the house? We're going to tear it all down, but also every part of us tearing it all down is dear to us and is progressing according to some kind of invisible blueprint.
Yeah, and every part of the house matters, even like the dumb shit of the house. She's going through and finding, so the main character, her parents have both died. It's their house and she inherited it, but just left it alone for years. So it's been rotting and it is untouched. So from the moment she walked out when she was 17 years old, nothing has shifted. So she walks in and she sees the cereal bowl of the cereal that she ate on the day that she left. And she also finds, her mom's Avon bubble bath bottles and all of this stuff that is just the detritus of life that becomes meaningful when the people that used it are gone. And those people are gone and that life is gone. and her grief is very deep, and it makes every object in the book imbued with a sense of meaning that I thought was very interesting and important, because I didn't want her, I wanted to tease out that relationship with her parents, but I didn't want it to depend on one particular thing. Like, you know, she found a particular necklace and then everything all came together. It's not about that. It's about just the accumulation of things and how she interprets the things because she knew them, but also this house could have just been knocked over and everything tossed in the trash, and none of those things would have meant anything to anybody.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. But the novel feels like an answer to many corny, terrible novels to me. And one of them is the novel where you find like the old candlestick that is also the old candlestick where your parents met at the Italian restaurant. And it was also given to them by their grandparents for some reason. So it's a candlestick that's for 3 generations. And it's all, you know, it's later filmed on, and you get nauseous every time you think about it. And this novel is about a whole bunch of stuff. And I was curious about it. You've lived in the UK for a while now. How long?
8 years, I think. Yeah. 6 years, 8 years, I don't know. Let's ask my former building manager. Do you have any idea?
Well, the eviction notice was on I really don't remember.
Eviction notice, yeah. He evicted her and then he was like, but I got to come to the event for the first novel. That's a real San Francisco landlord for you.
It's like 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah. And one of my questions was, did you remember all the stuff of America, or did you look at weird Google images? There's so much stuff in this book that is not local to you now.
Yeah, no, I remember the stuff. I remember all the stuff. And I said it in particular, the book is set in 1997. And that's because I thought I wouldn't know the stuff of 2020 if I wanted to set it then. I wouldn't know. And I wanted it to feel very real and realistic. And there's a lot of also, you know, the natural world operates as a fringe to the story, but there are things like skunk cabbage and particular types of you know, rose bushes or whatever that are in the book because I know that they exist in New England in this place. And I didn't want to have to buy a book to figure out what would be in a lawn that hasn't been taken care of for 5 years. I knew that because I had that lawn, but I didn't want to do research on that in this book. I did research on other things, but not about the stuff.
Yeah. And you focus, one of the things that I like about this book is that you focus on a lot of ugly stuff and you don't make it beautiful, you keep it ugly, which is against many corny writers' urges as well. Yes. Did you feel a dedication to ugliness?
In my life? Yes, I do, in fact. No, I just thought these were poor people, and their stuff would be what they could afford, and the things that they valued and treasured weren't necessarily expensive things, and I wanted that to be the case.
There's a really honest treatment of class in this novel to me, which is, I think, a deeply unspeakable topic in America. And I was curious if in Britain, where, at least as an American, part of my fantasy about Britain is that class is more on the table in terms of conversation. Do you think that made it easier to write this book?
No, I think I'm obsessed with social class and money, and always it's something that I think about, and particularly in reference to writing, because if you were to go to a writing program, or the further you move up the chain, it's more frequent that the people around you are richer and richer and richer, because it is almost impossible to survive working as a writer. And so I went to, I would say high school, where there were mostly working class people. And I went from there to college, where there's more commonly middle class people. And then I went to a writing program where I think I had the only parents who hadn't gone to college. And then, further and further on, people get ridiculously wealthy. So that is something that I think about a lot. And coming from, quite a working class background, my parents, when I was very young, worked at a grocery store together. And when I was older, my mother worked as a care assistant in a retirement home, and my father worked at Sears in the air conditioner department. And so I felt like I knew people like the people in this book, and that was interesting to me. And I also felt like I read a lot of books, frankly, about middle class couples living in Brooklyn, where the pain of their life is some sort of relationship dilemma, and that's not the book that I felt had any relevance to my life, and it wasn't the book that I wanted to write. And I felt like this book was something that I felt I could have something to say, and I would be the person that could say it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's the representation of working class people in American literature currently is tends to be political.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, I think in a previous era, maybe it was a more romanticized thing, but now it's usually to make a political point. And I feel this book is not interested in that. No. Yeah. And was there a temptation to go there?
I think because I said it in the time that it was before that happened. You know, some of these people probably in this town probably would have voted for he who shall not be named in the last election.
Ross Perot.
But previous to that, they would have all seen themselves as Democratic voters because of where they were. So I think that had I written the book in 2020, it would be, yes, there would be a different political tone to it, but that's just not the era that it was.
And the destruction and moving of the house also felt like a political metaphor in a way that I couldn't put my hands on, which I liked. It feels like an angry political act, the destruction of property. Like when we think of it in that way, it feels politically tied. Do you feel like that's part of the inner workings of this book?
Yeah, I guess so. There's something, so in the book, there is a part of the family that have become wealthy property developers. And so they have built up the town into a series of cul-de-sacs that all the houses look like each other. And they want to take this young woman's house and knock it down and just take the property to build the next cul-de-sac. And she really objects to them. She objects to them as people. She objects to their morality. She just doesn't like them, and she thinks that they're jerks. And so she doesn't want them to do that. And there is something, I think, that's, I guess, fundamentally political about how land is used and how money and property are passed down in families. That is, I think, fundamentally quite political. And I would say, back to the UK, like very political in the UK, in that for a long time, only the oldest son of a family could inherit a wealthy person's property. And I think that they've changed that law since. But that was the law for a really long time. And it's basically the basis for every Jane Austen novel is that, sorry, this set of people aren't going to get any money because they can't inherit because their girls are descended from a woman and they've got to find a man to marry in order to be able to fund their basic lifestyle. Yeah, so there are, I think, inheritance as an idea is very political.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the way money is so at the forefront of this book, in ways that you don't see in a lot of novels now. I feel like actually the most honest portrayal of money in fiction now is often in crime novels, because everybody's like, I want that briefcase full of money, which is like the most honest depiction of how so many people are living their lives, even if the rest of it is kind of generic. And here you have we'll talk a little bit about it, because it's both, I think, from where you came from, but also it seems to me as a result of other jobs that you've had and other thinking that you've been doing.
Yeah, so money, the person, Dell, who's the main character, needs money. She wants money. And so she does this project and she's going to get paid for the house, but she decides that rather than just take the money and run, she is going to take a smaller amount of money and she is going to deconstruct her house and she's going to move it. And then she's going to take this smaller amount of money and run. And what she eventually ends up doing with that money, whether she gets it or not, is an interesting act, I think. Is probably the most controversial thing in the book from Goodreads reviewers, average score 3.2 probably today. But they really didn't like what she does with this money, and they found it made them angry. And I think that there's something to me that's great about that, because if you actually care what a character does, then you have to fundamentally find that character slightly believable or sympathetic. And I think that there are many ways in which she is not a believable or sympathetic character in the choices that she makes, but she does something that just really pissed people off, and I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved reading how much they hated it.
I'm glad. Yeah, I don't frequent Goodreads for the same reason that I do not step into a nest of vipers. But but I do, now I'm going to look at what they said because I'm interested in that. And
just that they hate it. That's it. There's no further than that.
But I think often with provocative fiction, it gets reviewed that way. And it feels to me like a review of a horror novel that's like, I got really scared. Like, damn you, Jordan Peele, for getting me so scared. And that there's something about like, this book is provocative and it made me angry. Like, grrr. Now I'm mad at you for making the thing that made me angry.
Yeah.
When you wanted to make me angry.
Yeah. And the question of, what makes for a sympathetic female narrator or sympathetic female protagonist is very interesting too, because that is a political question. And that's a question for a lot of readers that want a woman who makes choices that they fundamentally agree with. And they don't mind her getting into a tight spot as long as she makes the correct choices to get out of that tight spot. And as well as whether there is something that is fundamentally soft or appealing or sympathetic about her, even if horrible things have happened to her. And I don't know that Dell meets those standards for sympathy. I don't think that she does, and I'm okay with that. I don't look to sympathize with male or female characters. I don't care. I want them to be interesting, and that's all I care about. And if they're interesting, I will read the next page. But I don't need to feel like they might be like me, or that they're people that I would be friends with necessarily.
We'll say more about that because part of the publication process for this book is that you were courted by a publishing house that is thinking about those categories as moneymakers, and your book it eludes them, but maybe promises them as well. Or at least the publisher might have thought so.
Yeah, they categorize the book as women's fiction, and women's fiction means a fiction. I mean, maybe you know better than I do. My understanding is fiction for women, an audience exclusively women.
She's always been bright.
Where the main character is a woman or sometimes women. And I think that there can be overlap with romance. It is considered a genre rather than literary fiction. And so there's literary fiction, which is serious, important stuff. And then there's genre fiction, which is the less serious, less important stuff, but actually mostly sells a lot more copies. And so thrillers and romance and women's fiction all fall under genre as opposed to literary fiction. And they have shelved it as women's fiction. What do you think women's fiction is? I'm curious.
I don't know.
Lisa Brown, do you know what women's fiction is?
I think it's fake.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it's fake.
Yeah, I mean, I think categorization is always kind of interesting because and in publishing, it's kind of for the industry, but it's for no one's brain. And
but it's the wrapping paper, I think, of the book. It's how they decide what the cover is going to look like and how the back cover copy is going to read. I think that the genre plays into that. And so if your book is categorized, I've had some friends who've written books that are really psychological studies of people, and they've been categorized as thrillers, and they haven't been thrillers. And so a reader goes to a bookstore and picks the book off the shelf, and they think it's a thriller, and the cover tells them that it's a thriller. And then they pick it up and they read it, and it's not actually the page turner in the way that they expect it to be. And then the reader feels disappointed. And so that's an example of a genre selection leading the wrong person to pick up a book, or the person to pick up the book for the wrong reason. And when you have an expectation going in, oh, this is going to be a romance or a crime novel or a spy thriller, and it doesn't meet those genre expectations, I can see why people feel disappointed and why they then give a 2-star Goodreads review, because it's just not meeting what they expected to get out of it. And they wanted to feel a certain way while they were reading the book, and they didn't get that.
That's interesting to me. And I guess maybe on top of this, I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but there's a little reader's guidey thing that is in the back of the book, and you talk about postpartum depression and finishing the book in the wake of that. And that seems to me an example of something that both kind of postpartum depression in specific and depression generally in general that is often really gendered in its own conversation.
Yeah, it feels like more people, I've read a lot more conversations about it than, maybe that's just because I have children and I experienced it, but it feels like there are more people talking about it. But I had very serious postpartum depression to the point that I was not functional for quite a long time. And just everything pissed me off. Other than just being ill, I noticed for the first time that people would come in to meet me and my baby, and they would ask my husband about his work, and they would ask him about the things that he was doing. And no one asked me about anything other than the baby, ever. Across the board, no one asked me anything. There was not even the basic, like, how are you doing? It was about, everything was in relation to the baby. And I just felt like my entire personality had dissolved, and I had no valid interests, and I had nothing about me mattered at all, except in function to how well I was taking care of this baby, which is frankly not very well. She was a bit of a tricky one, who's now an extremely adorable toddler, but she was a tricky baby. She had a milk allergy that made her really difficult to feed. So when she was 3 months old, just decided, well, I'm going to write a book. That's what I'm going to do. And I don't care what anybody thinks. And I'm sure that there are people who are going to think I'm a bad parent for doing this, but I just hired a babysitter 3 days a week. And I went to the library, and I knew that I had 12 months before I had to go back to work. And I just decided I'm going to get a book done in that time. Because once I go back to work and I have a 1-year-old and I have, a full-time job at a hospital, which was just really hectic, there's no chance that I'm ever going to do this. And so now is going to be the time, and I'm just going to do it. And there were, funny, interesting conversations with people who thought that was a crazy thing to do. And now I can sort of see the parallel with dismantling a house as an impossible task, and writing a book during maternity leave is an impossible task. But in the time, I just really wanted something for myself. And I really wanted mental space and to not judge myself against impossible standards. And I didn't feel, actually, writing a book felt way easier than taking care of a newborn, way easier. I would write a book every time rather than take care of a newborn. It was awful. And it's thankfully over now, because I have a 1-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. But
yeah, it's smooth sailing from then on. Do you feel like the novel is pushing back against depression in some way? Is that like, is what Stell doing in the novel just feel like a metaphor for that?
I think she's dealing with grief, and maybe I was dealing with that kind of, ego grief, identity grief, but it was very different than she has lost. Her life is so much harder than mine has ever been, but she has lost basically almost everybody who's been important to her, has disappointed her or died. She is friends with a pack of outsiders, small group of people on the fringe of society. Most of her friends are gay men. It is taking place during the period of AIDS, right after the cocktail came out. And so she knows many people who have died, and many of her friends have died. Many of her father's friends have died. And so she has just lost everything in a truly devastating way. And I think that she just desperately needs a project to do to feel some way about herself. She needs to have something that she sets as a goal, and she needs to complete it. And that is what she needs in order to make it to the next stage of her life.
The specter of AIDS definitely hangs over this book in many ways. I know that's also some of what you did research on, as opposed to the detritus, which is from your own brain. How did you feel? I mean, obviously this is an enormous issue that the world has faced and is facing, and it feels very personal to San Francisco and communities in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And how did you feel researching something that wasn't yours in that way?
So I had a lot of conversations with people about AIDS because I lived in San Francisco for 10 years. I have a lot of friends who are gay men. I know some people have HIV. I know some people have AIDS. And I felt like I knew a little bit, but not enough. A little bit about the experience, but not enough about the experience. So I read a lot. There is a really fantastic Instagram account, actually, that is user-submitted stories about people who have died from AIDS, called the AIDS Memorial. And I went back and read past issues of the Bay Reporter. I talked to people about their experiences, knowing people with AIDS or losing people with AIDS. And then I have a friend, Ryan Donovan, who is a professor at Duke and studies theater. And he did a section of the course that was about AIDS and musical theater. And he basically sent me all of his books, links to all of his books, and I read all of them. And so it was a that was the longest period of research of the book, was actually reading about AIDS and trying to understand what the experience of AIDS would have been like for the community that was affected by it. And it was, yeah, it's devastating. It's just devastating. I don't know. It was a weird thing to pick to research while also taking care of a newborn baby and suffering from postpartum depression. But it was, the human stories of how people experienced AIDS were very affecting and were also very inspiring. And to see the difference in the gay community from now, I would say a lot of the stories, fundamentally a lot of the stories came down to family breakdowns. So a lot of the user submitted stories were about, this is my brother, I love him very much. My parents did not go to the hospital when he died. This is my uncle, I never got to meet him because no one in the family talked to him ever again when they found out that he was gay. And I think that the stories would be very different today of people who have AIDS, but there was that, fundamental family breakdown and collapse that was similar between the story of the young woman in the book and a lot of the stories of people like these.
That is interesting. I think a lot, it feels to me like the literature that is coming out about AIDS now feels very important. It feels like there's been enough of a distance of one thing and enough of a different experience of how the disease is moving now that the literature feels more considered and less reactive.
Yeah.
And the reactive literature is pretty searing and moving to read, but there's something about the way that it's settling a little bit into the culture and into gay culture and queer culture and San Francisco culture that feels interesting to me. Did it feel, I don't know what the question is, but the book's out now, like everyone's wearing a mask. There's another plague and another plague that we won't understand until its literature catches up with
and I don't want to read a book about it. I don't want to read a book about COVID right now. I don't know about anybody else, but I don't want to read a book about COVID. I don't want to read a book about COVID until like 10 years from now, when I have forgotten some bits of it, and there is a level of thinking and introspection about it that can happen that needs distance and needs time.
Right.
But right now I don't want to read a book about COVID, and I would happily read more books about AIDS.
Maybe happily. Yeah. And I don't know if this is answerable either, but it's just interesting to me. And I feel that depression and creativity are talked about so often as interacting. I think there's often a really romanticized view of depression when it's connected to creativity. Yeah. And was there, like, can you talk a little bit about how depression was moving in your brain while you were writing a book?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I don't find depression particularly inspiring. And I do feel there's this romantic ideal of artists suffering in order to create art. And I don't aspire to that. And I don't think that that is healthy or good. It just happened to be what was happening in my life at the time. I wrote this book very quickly, faster than I've ever written anything else. And I think part of it was that I was operating on so little sleep. And this is also much more straightforward than anything I've ever written. The book is. It just, it doesn't really jump back and forth in time. There is a single focus, third person protagonist. And I've written a lot of other kind of tricky things that are formally experimental. And I didn't do that with this because I couldn't do it. I actually couldn't manage in my brain anything more complicated in terms of timelines or, changing the voices. I just couldn't do that. And so I think I was operating on a kind of animal level in my own life. And I think that probably comes out in the book. I just had a kind of a shark brain where supposedly sharks must always move forward in order to continue breathing. And I felt that way. I just had to slowly move a little bit forward every day. And sometimes that was very slowly with a couple hundred words that I was writing. And sometimes I wrote 2,000 words a day, but I just committed to writing 3 days a week, and I did. And would I have written the book if I didn't have pretty serious depression? I actually don't know. I think I needed it. I think I needed the book in a fundamental way. And so I did it.
Well, I think I think the straightforward nature of the book and the that it doesn't skip anything, speaks to the task at hand and the fix that your hero is in.
Like that interpretation, that's not true. I just couldn't figure out anything.
Well, I mean, it fits. It's just because it doesn't. You don't have to have tried 12 things before it fits.
Yeah.
But I think I think there's something in Delle's life that feels like one damn thing after another, and her situation of getting out is one damn thing after another, and the fact that you don't get to skip it makes you feel in it in a way that that doesn't happen. And I think that's often. I mean. I think it's the same with childbirth. Actually, there's so much literature about childbirth. Is like we're in a restaurant, like ooh, like cut to the baby, and that is not anyone's experience. I know of childbirth.
Mm-hmm. Is there a question?
No.
Okay.
I don't know. Just I very much admire the way this book looks at how concrete our obstacles and ourselves are. And that there's a temptation in literature to run with specific symbolism of specific tasks so that it becomes an allegory for all the tasks that we're doing. And this resists allegory, and therefore I think it gets more universal because you think, oh, this is like the mess that is in front of me right now.
And it can get a bit boring at times, I think, because there is a really detailed description of what I think you could read the book and understand how to dismantle a house. Now, should you have to know how to do that? Probably not. But I think you could read the book and understand how to do that because there is granular detail about doing that. And why is because I talked to a guy that did it and said, hey, how do you unbuild a house? And he told me, and I wrote it down, and then I did it in the book. But yeah, I think that a different way of approaching that would have been largely skipping that stuff, but it was important to me to have it in there. I wanted to have the sense of where she was and what was being taken down and what the house looked like from time to time. When you zoomed in and looked at her doing a thing, I wanted to know that, you know, she had pulled down the chimney and there was no wallpaper on the walls and the pipes were visible, and some of the wallpaper chunks on the floor had horsehair in them because that was in the plaster.
Well, I'm glad you're not in charge of your own marketing copy, because boring and granular would not be how I would describe it. But part of that is that I think through the prism of Delle's own fierceness of it, that the book feels really satisfying. It has the satisfaction that we've all had from destruction when you get to like really tear something apart, one thing or another. That's really satisfying on some primal level.
Hit stuff, yeah. I hit stuff sometimes. Yeah, I would. Yeah, she gets a little tools. She has one that's called the big claw and one called the little claw, and just points where she's just hacking at walls. And there's something about that I feel would be really satisfying. I say that I would probably do it for about 30 seconds and then my arm would hurt and then I would quit. I would never do a project like this, but it does feel like there's something when you're really angry, just hitting something, just having that physicality of just breaking something would be satisfying, and she gets to do it because she just has no inhibitions about it. Doesn't matter to her.
Yeah, and one of the claw scenes, I was reminded of something that I read once in a Miss Manners column, that the definition of civilization is that you want to hit things, but you don't. That's the definition of civilization. And it was nice to have her want to hit things and hit them.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. So speaking of other people, there are other people in this room, and maybe some of them have questions.
Great.
And if they do, you will answer them.
And if they don't, then we can go have a drink. So consider how much you want to have that question asked and answered.
Yeah, with her.
One comment. The first word that popped out at the back was retaliate, and I just love that so much because I know you, and I know that we've talked about your family, and interesting. Our maternal sides are quite similar, right? And I'm
going to repeat the question because there are some people that are joining online, and we don't know who those people are. This is a question from my former building manager, who I didn't learn until tonight had not pre-ordered my book, although he is thanked in the book, and he just had to buy it here, which is really embarrassing for him. And he asked me about a single word on the back cover, which is the word retaliate, and asked if I have any comment with regard to my family. And my answer is no comment. Next question.
Excellent. Thank you.
Right. For those who are online, I should add that there's a lot of nervous laughter and tense energy as a result of this question, which is always fun at a literary event. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. First of all, I loved her decision with the money. I loved the honesty of it and like how true it was to her and who she was. And I'm curious about your experience. And that carried through the whole book. And it was so satisfying as a reader that she never took a swerve and like did the traditional, or what word did you use? Corny?
Corny, maybe, is a word. Yeah.
Yeah, you stayed away from that, and it was so satisfying as a reader to have her stay true all the way through. How difficult was that to keep on track and to not get pulled into either from your editorial people or even from your like own like, I just want to be nice to her.
So we have to repeat the questions because there are people who are joining online and they can't hear you. So this is a question from my former boss who's sitting next to my other former boss. They're sitting in the front row and they're truly delightful people, and I am really honored that they came to join us tonight. The question was about whether it was difficult to make this character not corny. And I don't think it was, because she seemed to me such a deeply idiosyncratic person and so bizarre and interesting in the way that she interacted with the world, and really not like me at all. And it's a weird question that you get asked when you write a book about whether the book is true, basically whether it's a thinly veiled story of your own life. And it's not, there's nobody in here that's like my family. I have siblings, my parents are alive. But you get asked
you looked at me like I was supposed to do something about that. I don't think I can help you there.
But she's nothing like me, and I don't think she would like me. I don't think she'd want to be my friend. I think she would find me really conventional and boring in a way that she wouldn't find attractive and interesting in a friend. But I still like her. I still find her very interesting. And I think the more I thought about her and her background and just her sense of humor and how she interacts with the world and her just complete lack of impulse control, which I found very interesting, it just led her to a level of, I think, authenticity about herself that made it so it was easy not to make her corny because she's just so deeply weird. And that's what I found interesting about her. So that's always the path I wanted to follow, was her doing something deeply weird because that felt true to her.
Quick follow-up question. Did anyone in the editorial process ever try to steer you to make it more of a like women's fiction friendly book?
No, I only received actually really light edits. Surprisingly.
Yeah, sorry, the question was, were you given editorial pressure to make it more conventional?
No, I was not given editorial pressure to make it more conventional. I had a really lovely editor called Jen, and her edits were really very light and were just along the lines of making it emotional subtext a little bit deeper in a few places. And so, no, there was never a point when they needed her to be more conventional, but I would guess that the people who wanted her to be more conventional would have rejected the book. They wouldn't have bought the book and thought, how can we change the book to make her more appealing? They just didn't buy the book. And there were plenty of those people who just didn't buy the book. So that was probably their problem, one of them.
Kind of speaking of idiosyncrasy and peculiarity in the character, it felt very localized to me. And I was curious if you felt like you could only write this book having no longer living in America. Do you think you would have written something different had you stayed here?
I don't know.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know. This is set, it's not set where I grew up, but it's set, you could drive in an afternoon from where I grew up. And so it does have that sense of a book, a book people write as their first book that is sort of set in a childhood home. It's not that, but it's not far. And I think that is maybe something that I just needed to write at that time. What will my next book be like? Hopefully totally different than this. Not like this at all.
Do you feel like you're in the writing game for life?
As long as somebody wants to keep paying me for it. So whoever is listening remotely, if you want to just call in an order for 30 more books. Somebody actually, so I got in and I was thinking the only people, there are going to be about 5 people here and everybody's going to know me. And that will be great. And I will really enjoy seeing my 5 friends. And so actually, there's a surprising number of people in this room. But also, they had a stack of books that they asked me to sign. And I said, what is a stack of books? And it's a person who I do not know bought 5 books and asked me to sign and date all of them. And then also include one line from the book in the signature. And I was just it shows how few of these, this is my first reading / my only reading, in-person reading. I just thought that was so extraordinary that somebody who has never met me would want me to sign a book and include a line from the book.
I mean, welcome to the idiosyncrasy and peculiarity of literature. Here you are. Yeah, you wrote about a strange person. You are a strange person. You're in the company of strange people. It's the whole history of literature. It's the whole thing. So on that note, I have a very small set of spiritual beliefs, but one of them is that if you enter a independent bookstore and you leave without purchasing a book, you're committing a sin. And that includes if you have entered the bookstore in virtual space. I myself have already purchased quite the pile. I haven't paid for them yet, but I will, of books. And of course, the author of the evening will be signing copies of the book. You are required, you're not required to buy 5. I think that's pushing it, but you're required to buy 1. And then you should also buy at least 1 other book so that Books on the Park and other independent bookstores will continue to support authors as they start out their careers and continue to write about intractable, idiosyncratic people and their prickly tasks. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Thank you.